will ask if
Sorry.
about that. I will ask if you can mute yourselves while Steve's speaking, just so we avoid
Yes.
interruptions. But then once he's done, hopefully we'll have a time at the end. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat or wait till the end. I'd like to introduce Stephen Rubin. He is an attorney with Drazen Rubin Law. His mother had ALS. He's also a certified elder law attorney, and Drazen Rubin primarily focuses on elder care, estate, and trust planning. But he has years and years of experience, both with that in general, but also with ALS specifically. And I also wanted to mention that they have coming up their Caregiver Symposium that is on Friday, November 8th. It's hybrid, so you can either go in person or attend online. It will be held in North Haven, and I'm going to put a link to the symposium in the chat. It is, and Steve can talk about it a little bit more, primarily towards caregivers. It also has some CEU potential if that's something that you have a caregiver that's looking for. And I will turn it over to Steve.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, the symposium, it is a full day event in North Haven or virtual. It is focused on caregivers and social workers and people who are involved in the industry or work as a caregiver and things that we're looking for. We have some really cool speakers lined up. We have WTNH is actually coming. They're going to be running a health panel part of the day. So it's going to be a really cool event at this point. We're kind of excited for it. So that we can get things going. So, in going through some of these things for employment issues, yeah, there's all these questions about, what do we do? How do we stay employed? When do we tell our employer about it or what's going on? How do we inform them and should we even inform them? And, I get asked all the time and everyone else says to me like, when do I stop working? Well, part of that's up to you. Right, I think that's the first thing that has to come in when we have this conversation. Whether you stop working or not really depends on your own views, your own situation. For a lot of us, work gives us a meaning or purpose. It gives us something to shoot for. So I'm never in the, oh, you got to stop immediately. Like, today's your last day. Figure out what works, figure out how your health is going, figure out what your doctor suggests. As someone who likes to ignore their doctor, every once in a while you should listen to them. Only once in a while, that's the rule. And see what's going on. And also, what is your employment? What are you doing? Who do you work for? Are you in a job that is really something we can modify? The Americans with Disability Act allows for reasonable modifications for our employment. We're going to talk more about what that means because there's a lot of variations. And if we're going to do it, how do we inform people? Do we go right to the head of the company? Do we go to the immediate supervisor? And the answer is always going to depend on, well, what is your company's breakdown? What does it look like? Do you work in a small business? In which case, your employer is going to be probably maybe your coworker. They may be the one you have to go to no matter what, or is it a larger corporation, in which case you have to start with usually your immediate supervisor in HR. There's no great answer. But before I tell anyone anything, I start wanting to know, what are the rules? What does my employer offer? Do they have a history of issues? Right. I happen to know, I've dealt with this enough with clients over the years. Some of the corporations are actually really good. They will keep an individual on as an employee, even when they're no longer able to work. They'll still keep them on salary at some of those companies because they want to give people access to all their benefits. And they're kind of doing it as a system that they volunteer and they're really well prepared. And I have other employers where the moment they find out you're sick, they look for a reason to kick you out the door. So know what your employer's history is. Know what the options are before you actually go in. Everyone gets those benefit booklets, right? Every employer has gotten some sort of benefit booklet. You've probably all received things like your 401k plan, your time off, your disability coverage. How many people have actually read those? I mean, I wrote mine and I didn't actually read it when I was done. You know, like nobody reads them. You actually have to, when you're dealing with something like this, whether you're the caregiver, whether you're the individual who gonna need some help, you better read it. And yes, I know, it's boring. Trust me, they're terrible to read. Nobody likes reading them. They're awful. You still gotta look at them. And then you gotta look at your role and what things we wanna do. Yeah, can we make our job remote? You know, pre-2020, that was very difficult to get most employers to agree to. Today, most employers are happy to make you remote. You know, it actually costs them less depending on what they do or what your job is. You know, how can you change your hours or have a flexible work schedule? I have an employee here. I don't care what hours of the day she works as long as she gets her stuff done. And because she's been sick with something else, she just needs a more flexible schedule. Yeah, you can make those things work for people, whether you have to as an employer or not. A lot of employers will, not all. And it's important to understand like the benefit programs your employer has. Yeah. What is the situation? What are the benefit programs? What are the official benefit programs? And what are the unofficial benefit programs? Because a lot of employers do have unofficial policies. An interesting thing we're seeing more of today is I'm seeing a lot of employers are offering unlimited time off. You know, they're giving people more flexibility with their schedules. How is that going to work? Is your employer a large employer with 50 or more employees where we have to go under federal law? Or are they a smaller employer where Connecticut FMLA and Connecticut Paid Family Leave Act take control? Because that's also important to know is what your employer falls under from a categorical standpoint. So let's talk about the ADA, because there's so many myths about the Americans with Disability Act. And I think everything is a myth. You know, people think it means that you can always have your job with a disability, and that's not the answer. The ADA is designed to protect against discrimination because you are disabled. It does not apply to all businesses, though. It only applies to businesses that have 15 or more employees. So small businesses are usually going to be exempt from the requirements. They're not required to make reasonable accommodations. They're not required to have support services. They're not required to do anything if you're a small company. And in order for you to qualify for the ADA protection, you must be qualified under whatever their rule is. Whether it's because you are able to do the job or you're able to perform essential functions of the job. So what does a reasonable accommodation mean? And in a lot of cases, what does it really prevent or prohibit? Generally speaking, it's supposed to, and this is actually from the statute itself, it's supposed to allow for modifications to your employment, to your position, to your workspace, and to your schedule. Appropriate tools to allow you to do more efficient things. Those are the key things that it's supposed to cover. But it doesn't mean that your employer is obligated even if they fall under the act. Because anything that is unreasonable because it is too expensive, it fundamentally changes the position, it intrudes too much on the business, automatically prohibits activities and means you're not eligible for it. So that's what where it comes into play. So what are things that can be unreasonable or reasonable depending on it? Installing a ramp is generally considered to be a reasonable modification in most cases. Widening doorways can be both reasonable and unreasonable because what size is the business, how expensive are the modifications, all of those things are going to factor in. And there's lawsuits on pretty much every single one of the bullets I put up here. And guess what? The case is split to both sides of the bullet as being reasonable and unreasonable. because these cases are very fact specific. Changing work hours would, from a lot of businesses, be deemed to be not a reasonable request. Except what if it's a financial industry where the markets are only open during certain hours? Well, then it's not reasonable. So we have to always figure out, what does that actually mean? It is considered reasonable for most employers, though, to grant additional unpaid leave time. So if you want more time off of work, it's generally allowed. If the employer has to acquire appropriate technology sources, it may or may not be reasonable, depending on what those sources are. There's an interesting one about for someone who has to lift up more than 20 pounds. And did the employer have to go out and purchase a piece of equipment to lift up that 20-pound item that could be controlled by a remote for the individual? And they found that to be an unreasonable change in employment, because the lifting the 20 pounds was essential to the position, and the cost of doing so impacted the business so much that they were not willing to do so. And the court found in favor of the business on that. So knowing what our positions are also has a huge impact. It is far easier to modify desk jobs than it is to modify a job with physical labor or activities. So because of the hardships that it can be placed on employers, we have to always be mindful. Eliminating your job responsibilities is not considered a reasonable accommodation. Lowering standards at the employer would not be considered reasonable. Expansions, too much of a reduction in work hours is not considered reasonable. There's an interesting one now about keeping a position open. So an individual was out on leave and they requested that the position be kept open for them while they went in through treatment. And the court said an indefinite open position impacts the bottom line of the business too much. We're not going to require that. So we will allow it to remain open for the 12 work weeks under the law, but we're not going to allow it to remain open for other purposes. Now, if someone is qualified for disability, whether they're an employer or whether they're the employee or the caregiver, the first step is to see if we qualify under federal law, which is the FMLA, which stands for Family Medical Leave Act. It only applies to businesses with 50 or more employees. They don't have to be full-time employees. So part-timers will count towards the number. I remember reading an article about that years ago where there was kind of a debate, but the rule is now they do not have to be full-timers. You get a 12 work week period of leave in a 12-month period of time. There is a new coverage. It's 26 weeks if you're caring for someone who's active duty military now. Under the federal law. It only applies to a serious health condition that makes the employee unable to perform a job function, or applies to an employee's spouse, child, or parent. Not to your in-laws, note that, not to a significant other, only to that degree of relationship. And what does it do? Well, it mandates that you give them a 30-day notice that you need to take time off now under federal law. You're still entitled to your job when you come back, or they can move you to a different position within the company, but you have equal duties, benefits, and pay. So you can be shifted. It's not a guarantee of your exact position. There is a rule, however, if you are in the top 10% of salaried earners within your company, then there's some special exemptions that will apply to only to you. We're not going to get into those in depth today, but there are these special rules for people who make more money.
Concentrate better, just
if an employee quits So they leave at the end of the leave. The employer can actually demand that the employee reimburse them for any insurance premium payments that they paid out during that 12-week period of time for them or their family members. Employers are allowed to require a certification of healthcare condition by healthcare professionals. So HIPAA is not 100% protected there. And most employers will do this now. They can require you to use all of your sick time, paid vacation time, or anything else you've earned at the company in the very beginning of it. So you don't get to keep your vacation days at the end. There's a difference with Connecticut that we're going to talk about there. Because Connecticut passed the Connecticut Paid Leave and Family Leave Acts a few years ago. Now, some of the big difference is that Connecticut provides for a 12-week period of time of unpaid leave under the Leave Act. We also, same rule for children, parents, and spouses with the ability to return to work. This applies to employers who only have one full-time employee. All small businesses have to do this. Now, under the paid leave portion of the act, there's actually a fund administered by the Connecticut Paid Leave Authority where you can actually receive payment during that period of time. It is not unpaid leave. And if you don't realize that 0.5% of your paycheck every month is actually put in towards that act, you actually contribute funds towards it. Most people don't realize that taking it directly out of their payment now. It has to be for a qualifying health event. What is a qualifying health event? Basically anything that seems to provide care so far has been approved. I actually haven't had anyone get denied for pretty much anything yet, so we'll see. It's still new enough that there's plenty of time for them to start denying stuff at some point. And it's a broad application. Now, big difference is with the 12 weeks being paid. There is no job protection under that program. You are not guaranteed your same job back when you return to work. It's not like the federal law, which guaranteed it. This allows, there are provisions that prohibit termination, but they can still terminate for cause. They can be used at the same time, or they can run separately. So you can have the Connecticut FMLA and then the Connecticut Paid Leave Act, depending on how much vacation time you have built up. Now, one big important note with that is Connecticut FMLA does not require you to use every single day of vacation. You're actually allowed to bank up to 12 days of unpaid leave. So if you have vacation time, you have PTO time built up, you can keep 12 days. So you only have to use up anything greater than that to qualify for the Paid Leave Act. And then you can jump into paid leave, which seems counterintuitive. There is no reimbursement through the Connecticut Paid Leave Program. You don't pay the state back. They don't tally it up when you pass away. There's no estate tax liens. There's no liens at all. They never look for collections because you've tentatively and technically already paid into that program. The 12 weeks of paid leave is only in a 12-month period of time. You cannot get 2 paid leave periods within the same calendar year. It does not equal your salary. It's usually significant reduction, but it's designed to be subsistence level to make sure you can meet basic requirements to live, but no luxuries through the program. So when we do this, we always, whenever we're dealing with a family and we're going through some of these things, we always have to look at what the insurance coverages are. So if someone is receiving benefits through an employer, and most people today, most employers offer some sort of health insurance benefit. If you're the primary insurer for the family, what happens? And you've become sick, or you're the one taking leave, and you're going past the 12 weeks of time. We have to figure out, do we qualify for coverage elsewhere? Through Husky programs, through the Connecticut Insurance Exchange. Do we want to do COBRA for our coverages, at least for a short period? COBRA gets expensive, though, and we all know it. I've never seen a cheap COBRA coverage. So there's a big factor with COBRA is how we utilize it. And do we have disability covers through our employer? Do we have short-term or long-term, and what are the rules? Most long-term disability policies will require an application to Social Security disability. Part of the reason why is there's actually a credit for the amount that you get out of Social Security, so it reduces down the benefit they have to pay you. So you need to know what the rules are for short and long-term coverages through your employer. If your employer doesn't have coverage, have you ever purchased it on your own? Surprisingly enough, I've had people who have purchased coverage and completely forgot they were paying for it. They've done like the Aflacs of the world or something else where they actually had some coverage. May not have been great, but it was still better than zero for the short term. Because long-term disability doesn't kick in until 6 months. Another big change in the long-term disability world. Historically, long-term disability and coverage was good for 10 years, or it was good, excuse me, until you're age 65. New coverage rules actually allow for short-term disability coverages. So some disability policies may only cover for 2 years. And they might have an out at the end of the 2 years. Some might have a 2-year period where there's an initial coverage and then an extension. What are those rules? And every policy is going to be different. So if you come in and you say, hey, Steve, what's my policy going to cover? I don't know. Let's read your policy. Remember I said in the beginning, you got to read stuff? Got to read stuff. Because every company is doing this differently now. There's so many new options out there. There's even specialty policies which will have more technical rules. They're like what we call profession-based policies. So as a result of your disability, you can no longer do your profession, whatever it was. If I can no longer be an attorney anymore as a result of my disability, then it's a different rule for it and a different type of policy than a traditional disability policy. So we have to actually see what those policies cover. And then we got to look at, are we going to have gaps in our coverage and what can we do to kind of fill in those gaps? You know, how do we get those coverage benefits? Is it we need to apply for veterans benefits? Should we be looking at Medicaid? Are we eligible for any of these programs? What is Medicare actually going to cover? Because, you know, the coverage myths are greater than what it actually covers for almost everybody. So we have to factor those things in as well. So when we look at this employment stuff, you know, the number one mistake I'm going to tell you, and I emphasize this a lot today, because honestly, it is the biggest mistake people make, is you don't look at your coverages first. Know what your policies cover, what your employer actually has. And whether we're sick or not, we should always be checking those every year. I know that's like the most boring thing in the world to ever do. Every January you get your new benefit packet. I promise you it's actually worth reading every year. What is your employer's rules for these coverages? How is it going to work? You know, what is their rule about discrimination? What do they do about reasonable coverage? Are we under FMLA? Because if your employer is large enough, they disclose the number of employees they have in their booklets every year, which tells us what coverage we actually are going to be eligible for if we were to get sick. So when something does happen, we're not just running around going, oh man, where do I go? So I think those are the key starting points when we look at these benefits, is really figure out like how to integrate them together. You know, how we can take advantage of it. We are in a way lucky that Connecticut actually has a paid leave act, because there's plenty of states that don't. It's actually the majority right now. And employers are not required to offer a paid long-term care leave. And every state has a different policy. I was just talking to dealing with this in New Jersey the other day. New Jersey has a program now where the employee gets 40% of their salary through the state, and the employer has the option of contributing or not. You know, which employers actually contribute? Does, you know, if we ever did a plan like that here, who would contribute? What is the rule gonna be? So it's gonna be really important to kind of figure out what you are thinking or what your employer has to know what your options are. So you're not just going out into the wilderness with these coverage issues. And then, you know, another thing that's important to be aware of is what happens if we need to take early withdrawals from our retirement accounts. I see that a lot lately as people are taking, you know, IRA withdrawals or 401k withdrawals, or in some cases they have deferred compensation plans through their employer. And they wait to take it until something happens or they take it early. Does that impact your benefits? And the answer is yes. Remember, things that count as income can have an impact on a number of programs. Yeah. Your coverage through Medicare, the premiums are actually income based now. They're indexed to your income. So if your income goes up too much, you pay a significantly higher premium every month. So we always want to be factoring in, like, what does that look like? Yeah, it will not impact Social Security. There's a myth that like your retirement income will impact Social Security disability. It doesn't. Social Security disability is based on earned income, not unearned income. So you're okay there. But it would impact things like SSI if you were actually on an SSI based program. You know, another big tip, every year check your benefit programs for what you're actually gonna be covered for, but also check your Social Security program. How many quarters did you pay in for the last year? What coverages do you have? What is your disability number gonna look like? I don't plan to become disabled anytime soon, I hope. But I still check every year, you know, what it would happen if I was, because it goes into my personal planning and how I handle things. So it's just the little things that you can start doing early on before you have to file for claims to know what you're actually facing and to know when you're doing it. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to questions. I kind of like questions. And I feel like it's boring listening to me.
Does
So
anyone have questions or want to put them in the chat?
I say feel free to unmute and ask it verbally or put it in the chat, whatever's easier for you guys.
I have a question. My name is Rob Williams. I'm 49 years old, and I'm trying to change my employment to one that's better suited for my commute, because I'm still able to work, but I'd rather work closer to home before it gets much worse. Do I have to disclose my disability to a prospective employer? And I don't think I have to, but when should I disclose?
So you don't have to disclose it at the time of hiring, but they're not allowed to discriminate against you in hiring if you choose to. You're not required to do it in the initial interview or to disclose that you have these issues. However, remember, when you join a new company, you're usually going to be in some sort of window of time where you're under evaluation or review. So the concerns that we see a lot is someone who needs some care, or their symptoms change, their voice changes, and the employer starts thinking it's something else that's not related to the illness, and all of a sudden they decide they want to let you go for what they deem to be work product or behavioral performance issues. And it really had nothing to do with performance. It was all about something else. So I'm generally in favor of disclosing earlier on, even though sometimes that's riskier. I have found that generally has worked better with a lot of employers, and they're more likely to be accommodating, and they're required to be accommodating.
Understood.
But
So
I see
maybe,
what the reputation is, and is it a small company? Is it a large, again, look at going back to those analysis things, like how large of an employer is it? What benefits are they going to offer? Yeah, what are they going to look like within those benefit rules before we make any decisions? And is it a job you can do remote, or is it a job that requires you to do it at home?
I'll be able to do it remotely. I should
So-
be able to do it.
So then that might open up things a little bit more to, giving you more flexibility on disclosing at a later point if it's something you could do remotely.
Got it. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, what's
Yes,
your
go ahead.
question?
Okay. My name is Milta Signor. Attorney Rubin is our attorney. Hi, Attorney Rubin. Anyway, I have a couple questions, and I was just wondering, in my case, I actually am a full-time caregiver for Sean now. So I had to reduce my hours to per diem at the hospital, and I'm just curious if there are any, as of today, I know last time we spoke, Attorney Rubin, there wasn't any, but any like support or laws for full-time spouses, full-time caregivers that are actual spouses that can't work and are not qualified for Medicaid because my husband's his disability is above the range. I'm not even eligible for Medicaid for my health benefits because of
So
his disability.
there's been no law changes to give any benefits outside of Medicaid. Without Medicaid supports, there's no other programs available for anything now.
Do you know if there's anything in place? I mean, is there anything that someone can start or I can start, or or is that something I might be able to like sit with you privately and get started, but something to get something going? I think it's really unfair for us to have to leave our full-time job because we don't have other options. We don't have any outside help. I mean, there's grants out there that we have applied to all, which the ALS, Michelle's been a great help with everything that we've asked for so far. But I mean, money-wise, financially, it's a big hit for our family because now we're reduced to a
Sure.
term income. We can't even afford our mortgage kind of income. You know what I mean?
I mean, unfortunately, the only way to get anything accomplished would be through the legislature, which I don't think is likely. Personally, I don't think they'll do it because they have the program through Medicaid, and I think that's going to be their focus. But if you were trying to do it, I would start with your local senator or state representative and see if they'll at least submit something and maybe get a hearing going or something at the Capitol.
Is that something that you would be able to assist me on, like to getting the paperwork? I wouldn't even know how to get started on something. I think it's really unfair that
There's no paperwork. You just need to have a meeting. You actually just want to talk to your state representative or your state senator, and you want to have them submit a legislation. You're asking them to submit a request to the legislature to do something.
Milta, if you'd like, I can contact you afterwards,
Yeah.
and we can walk you through a little bit how to do that. Like Steve says, there's nothing really on the horizon in the legislature, but it doesn't hurt to reach out to your local representatives to say this is really important to me. So I can talk to you, after this, or I can email you, and then at least
It
kind of
also
walk
is
you
the
through.
time to do it because it's election season.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
So-
I can't believe that nothing is in place by now. I'm sure I'm not the first one that has no choices like we do. You know what I mean? So I would love to be able to maybe even bring something forward. I mean, it may not help me in my situation this present time, but maybe for the next person that may be going through what I'm presently going through.
Yeah, and that's where going to the legislature is what makes sense, because Yeah, we've been working on a bill with the legislature for 8 years now for the change in the way benefits work for home care. Yeah, is it gonna pass this year? I have no idea, but we're not gonna stop. We still try. It's because it's always for the long haul.
I mean, I know there are things out there for other people to be able to take care of him and, and then if you qualify for Medicaid, I know all about that. I've done a lot of research, but for spouses, there's absolutely nothing. And I think that that's something definitely should be done.
So that's where that's where the legislature has to do it. I can't change that one.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to know where to go to get started. I just hope I'll be able to make a difference somehow, but yeah.
I think it's worth trying. You never know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we just didn't ever thought that by now that there really wouldn't be any choices for me as a caregiver, as a spouse. But there really isn't anything out there other than, of course, being blessed by the grants that we've been qualified for and that kind of thing. But I mean, like a steady income for that, for someone with a terminal illness, for a caregiver. And that's what I want to bring forward. So I appreciate it.
Steve, we had a question in the chat about, do you know if there are if there are other states that have something, I guess, similar to like the Connecticut Paid Family Leave Act?
I know other
Um,
states do. I don't have a list exactly of every single state, but I know every state has now worked on some variation of the statewide Family Medical Leave Act, and then the paid leave variations. Every state has come up with their own policies. Some require employers.
Okay.
And yeah, that some of them are like some employers are required to have coverage for people to take family or paid leave, and some have different rules for each state now. But I don't have a list. I apologize.
Okay, no, that's fine. Other questions from anyone? Specifically while we have Steve here?
You had sent me one and it was pretty good. Amy sent me one. Let's see, I got it. And one of the questions Amy had sent me was, what considerations do you have if you're gonna switch to like Medicare instead of remaining on your insurance or maybe your spouse's insurance? That's a great question because we get it all the time. What do you think? Do I just go on Medicare coverage? What happens if I get insurance for my spouse? So if you get disability, you're going to get Medicare, period. You have the right to opt out of the Medicare coverage and utilize other coverages. So you can use the coverage for instead of going directly under Medicare, you can opt back into your spouse's work plan, for example. So you'll have Medicare Part A, but instead of using Medicare Part B as your primary insurance, your spouse's coverage becomes your primary. So you have the ability to do that. So when we start looking at it, we take advantage of that rule because sometimes we'll get the best of both worlds. We'll get a little bit of extra coverage through different programs. The biggest consideration is what the coverages are going to look like. What do we need out of them? Do I remain on if I'm still employed, obviously I'm going to remain on my own insurance because I cannot elect to go on Medicare until I'm qualified for Social Security disability. And in order to qualify for Social Security disability, I have to be unable to have substantial and gainful employment, which basically means I'm not working. And then I can opt into Medicare. So when I have the ability to go on Medicare, I'm going to look at whether it's worth staying on my spouse's plan or not by looking at what the coverages they have are. Do they have things like, what is their coverage for medical equipment? Some private insurance is actually better than Medicare depending on the plan. What is their coverages for drug coverage? Some insurances, again, have better coverage for that. What is that going to look like? And so those are the things that we factor in when we make the decision of, do we go off of the current plan or do we remain on it, and when we're going to opt in. So we have to look at those differences. So it's really about, kind of I almost take it at once a year picture. Because when you make this decision, you also get to make it again and again and again. Because with Medicare, if you choose not to use all the primary coverage, every year there's this window, it's called open enrollment, where you then get to decide if you want to change your coverages again. And it just keeps recycling. Once a year, you get to make insurance plan changes for the following year. So you're not done with these decisions. So every year we kind of say, let's do an evaluation. Medicare did this really helpful thing a few years ago. They put up a website and you could put in whatever prescriptions you're on and run it against all the different drug plans now and see which one makes the most sense for you. And you can actually balance out the cost. So I use those things. I tell people to do it all the time because it just makes it easier to figure out your options. So I thought that was a great question from Amy. Then the other one is Amy asked, is it better to file for Medicare right away if someone gets diagnosed or when they're done working? And technically you have to wait until you're done working. Even if you're with a diagnosis, you're not eligible until you're Medicare eligibility is not because you have ALS technically. The Medicare eligibility is because you qualified for Social Security disability and they are doing a compassionate allowance for Medicare. So in order to be eligible for the Medicare, you have to no longer be having the substantial and gainful employment. So we'll just call it SAGA because it's easier, but that's what it means. So the SAGA rules are how it's handled. So you always have to be mindful of that. So the timing isn't 100% up to you. It's the way it works with you and when you leave work and how it's going to be handled. Any other questions? Sorry, Amy.
I was going to say the same thing. Anyone? Otherwise, I guess we could end a little early. If that's works. If you do have other questions, Steve is available. The slide there shows all the contact information for him. You can obviously reach out to me or Michelle. We appreciate you all being here today. Please let us know. Oh, and actually, Steve,
easiest way to get a hold of me is bettercallsteven.com. It's really easy.
If you have that link that you were just talking about with the Medicare drug, is it just on the Medicare site? I'm not.
Yeah, I was right through the Medicare site.
Okay. All right. We can find that too and have that for people if they need it. So if no one has any other questions, we'll go ahead and end our Ask the Expert.